Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Africa I Share discussion on this beautiful Thursday evening. Thank you again for joining us. Today we'll be discussing digital law issues, as we did maybe about 2 months ago or thereabout. Today's discussion will be on dark patterns, and we've got ourselves quite an interesting panel. The panel is made up of Uche. Uche is a UX designer. He's going to explain to us what a UX or a user-centered designer is and all the wonderful and amazing work that he does. We also have Chenai Che. She is a tech policy and digital rights professional. She does quite a lot of amazing work. She's also going to get her 5 minutes to explain to us all the work that she's doing and what exactly she specializes in. We also have Ridwan from Tech Advisory on the call, and Ridwan is a tech lawyer out of Nigeria, and he does quite a lot of work on digital law and data protection, and he heads up the data protection division at Tech Advisory. Like I said, today's discussion is on dark patterns. We have titled it Dark Patterns, the Art of Deception by Design. And this discussion follows research that myself and Ridwan did over the last 2 or so months. And this research looked at what are dark patterns, how do they affect people, can you as an everyday user see them, can you pick them up? If you can, are they negative, are they positive? If they are negative, how can you go about getting redress in terms of the law? Are there laws that actually even protect you? Is this a Eurocentric concept, or is this a concept that you're also finding on the continent? And do our laws on the continent cover this and help us in any way? So I am going to now have our panelists introduce themselves before we dive into of the questions that Ridwan and myself found while we're doing our research. And the research is now available on the Tech Hive Advisory website, and we have shared it on social media. We will also share it in the chat, and we'll continue to share it. You just have to follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter to find the link. So over to you, Uche, 5 minutes to explain to us what you do, who you are, where you're based.
Hi everyone, my name is Che, and I'm a product UX designer. I have over 3 years experience working in marketing design, product strategy, running design sprints, prototyping, micro interactions, really with a solid background in interface design and branding. So generally, I help teams build lovable products and achieve business goals, right? I'm that intersection. And I implementing a human-centered approach to present solutions via data-informed designs that deliver better experience for people and address user problems and social problems. And this usually translates into improved conversions, stopping drop-offs, making products easy to use, increased sales and revenue, and generally engaging users as customers. And I'm currently freelancing for Top Tile. It's an agency in San Francisco, and also leading design for a startup who's trying to use software to build a space where businesses can use tech tools as a way to enhance their own experience as well. Before that, I was designing at Paga, and before that, I was working at Obodos, an agency in the UK. So generally in my field as a UX designer, right, I use design language and I use research and I use data and I use all the tools available to me generally to make digital experience better for you as a user or the everyday human being.
I'll go over to Chennai. Could you please introduce yourself?
So my name is Chennai, and I work at the intersection of tech, policy, and gender. And my work over the last couple of years has really been trying to understand the access and use of women, gender diverse people, and children and young people when it comes to actually accessing the internet and what it means for them in terms of their digital rights. It spanned over issues with regards to access, with regards to connectivity, and these lately privacy and data protection, and as well as artificial intelligence. So my work really is trying to center the experience of people with technology rather than centering technology as the solution to issues. I currently work at the Web Foundation as a Gender and Digital Rights Research Manager, which looks at 4 countries, Ghana, and tries to understand the experience of women's rights, of women and men's rights, women in comparison to men, in terms of accessing their rights and making use of the internet. And then I'm also, I think, in this conversation, I'm a 2019-2020 Tech Policy Fellow, and what that entails is being an independent researcher who's specifically trying to understand artificial intelligence and digital rights. In this specific project, I've been trying to assess the adequacy of privacy and data protection in a country like South Africa, which has a booming AI market rather than fourth industrial, and to think about what does it mean for marginalized groups. So making use of feminist thinking and feminist theory in order to be able to understand what is the impact in terms of power dynamics, who is going to be benefiting, and at the end of the day, how do we make sure that these technologies, as they come up, do not result in increased injustices, because we already know we exist in context of injustices, especially from a gender perspective, so that they can be used by the communities most affected of the issues that they face. So, yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Chennai, for that. Ridwan, a brief introduction, please.
Yeah, my name is Ridwan Obedi. I lead the privacy, tech policy, data protection team at Tech Advisory. And essentially, my work has always been around the intersection of privacy, data protection, data ethics, cybersecurity, and law. So part of what we've been trying to do at TechHive is to also do research to see things as far as how the technology that we continue to use sort of interface and also sort of impact on consumers. Done a couple of research. More recently, we looked at self-assessment app that was launched by a couple of state governments, and a couple of Nigerian state governments, to see how they fare when you compare the privacy protection that is available on those apps. We've done a couple of other research looking at a number of other issues that affects consumer protection, data protection, and all that. And interestingly, I'm excited about this particular research that we just did, looking at dark patterns across different parts of the continent. And it's interesting to also know that this accident is actually quite pervasive. An interesting thing is we looked at not just only service providers who are actually based in the continent, but we actually looked at service providers who are also targeting consumers on the continent. And it's quite pervasive that it's so ingrained that people probably don't even know that somehow they keep making decisions, that the decisions are being influenced. And I'm super excited about the outcome of what we were able to do together with Amanda and Digital Law House. And I'm looking forward to share our findings here, and of course speak broadly into the issues of dark patterns and how, as consumers, also we can continue to improve our online interaction, and of course making sure we are also less and less of a victim. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ridwan, for that. So, to not waste time, let's dive in. I am going to ask Uche, because you are a UX designer. Firstly, what is UX design? Secondly, what are dark patterns? So can you just walk us through the whole design process, and why do we have dark patterns? What are they? And me as a user, how can I spot them? You can give us an example of when, as a user, when you're using, let's say, an online service, you're using an app on your phone, how can you spot these dark patterns or these design tactics that are made use of?
So to answer your first question, what is user experience design? In a summary, user experience design is the process design team use to create products, digital products sometimes, that provide meaningful and relevant experiences to users, right? It involves the design of the entire process of buying and integrating a product, including aspects of branding, design itself, usability, and function. user experience design is also used interchangeably with user interface design. But usability can be like a subset that differentiates the two segments of user interface and user experience design. And just like I'll just move quickly to what dark patterns are and how to support them and what some of these examples are. Now, because user experience design is directly intertwined with businesses, because as a user experience designer, you're not only trying to help the user, but you're also trying to help the business, your employers, or whoever you're working for, or whatever the product is or the product goals. Now, in some of these situations, making money is an essential part of any business, right? So to create more profit, companies try to build a more customer-centric culture, right? And they try to deliver a personalized experience that creates excellent customer service and use that strategy, right? And this is where good user experience design falls in, because user experience design is about providing users with seamless and enjoyable interactions with products, right? Or in this particular situation, it can be used to manipulate the user and trick them into making decisions that aren't necessarily good for them, but benefit the company, right? And then the later is what we are referring to as dark patterns. Now, dark pattern is a term that was coined by, I don't remember his name right now, but I think it was a UK his design leader. And he defined it as the art of presenting the user with crafty interface that tricks users into doing things that they might not otherwise want to do, right? And of course, dark patterns are not encouraged, right? They wouldn't trust you and take advantage of individuals by using your products, right? Sometimes they seem to prove to deliver results, right? Dark patterns deliver results, right? But then it's only short term because they eventually lead to frustrated customers, deleted accounts, and sometimes even. And you've most certainly interacted with a dark pattern. If you've ever felt like you signed up for a service that you didn't actually want to, or you bought something accidentally. These are like some typical examples of the dark aspect of user experience design, right? And I can go in a lot into it, but I just stop there for now.
Okay. So for example, let's say I sign up for a service, and it's easy to sign up for it. There's that green accept button, everything, fill in my details, sign up. And there's actually a service I have in mind right now. I'll not name and shame, but signed up, put in my banking details, everything. I got my free 1 year subscription, but now I want to cancel that subscription, and I cannot seem to find where to cancel. I can access the services. I just don't know where to go to cancel. It's extremely difficult. I think I'm now going to have to go to like the help button or support button or send an email or something. Would you call that a manifestation of dark patterns?
Definitely, that's like the number one example of dark pattern. It's called the Roach Motel. And a classical example, because I will name and shame, the classical example of that is Amazon, right? I'll challenge anybody here to try to delete their Amazon account. If you have an Amazon account, try to delete it. I promise you, it's going to be the most frustrating experience that you've ever had in your life, right? So the Roach model is a type of dark pattern where companies use this trick to get people to sign up for premium subscriptions moderately. But then, like you said, the sign up process is fast, it's simple, but the cancellation options are usually hidden in some parts of the website where the user wouldn't normally think or naturally think to use, right? And Facebook did this a while ago, but then they switched it up where it was just a crazy experience for you to deactivate your account. And the same thing with Amazon. And the way Amazon does this is sometimes you don't even need to sign up for you to access Amazon services, which is great. But then if you eventually sign up and something happens and you want to delete your account, you're not going to find it in the help. You're not going to find it in my account. You're not going to find it anywhere in the place that you naturally think to use. You'd find it somewhere down at the bottom of Amazon websites in the footer where they ask for more. And now when you go into more, there's like another layer of something that you need to pick. Then when you choose that, there's another layer of something that you need to pick. And then eventually when you're like at the third step is where they provide you with the option to delete your account. And now that's not even the height of it, because when you hit that button, you're not going to be able to delete their accounts. When you hit that button, they ask you some very emotionally manipulating questions like, oh, why are you trying to leave us? What happened? What can we do to make you stay? And if eventually you're frustrated and you're like, I don't want this anymore, I just want to delete my account, and you choose to delete your account, they don't do that. They then direct you to a customer care service, like someone where you have to talk to, and then the person asks you or try to do like a survey or question you why you want to delete your account. And this person's role is basically to like manipulate you further and persuade you to not delete your account, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then if you're not frustrated at that point, because the normal person would have been frustrated by this point, they're already gone. But then if you hold on and you deal with the customer service agent, mind you, this agent is not going to make it easy for you. You're going to ask them, I want to delete your account. They will ask you why. When you tell them why, they'll tell you, what can we do to help you? How can we, serve you better? Or don't leave, is there like a different service you're trying to use? If at the end of the day, you like after spending like an hour, then you finally say, okay, we want to delete your account. They don't delete your account even at that point. It takes about 3 to 5 business days for your account to eventually be deleted, right? And that's what the person is going to tell you. They're going to tell you that period, that waiting period, is basically a time for you to come back to your senses and reactivate your account. So the Roach Motel is a classic example of that patterns and that we experience, in our day-to-day lives.
And it's actually a very fitting name. I think most social media platforms give you a 30-day window, and you first have to deactivate your account. You wait 30 days, and I'm sure by day 25, you are clicking back onto your account and you just want to see what Read1 is doing or what Chennai has posted. But then just hearing you describe that very long process, I am thinking about the average everyday user that is possibly in a remote area and that hardly has internet access, that possibly just may have struggled to buy a little bit of data to be able to access the internet, and now they have to go through this entire long process just to be able to unsubscribe from the particular service. So I'm not going to come on to Chennai and not to say men do not experience this, do not get me wrong, but I'll ask Chennai to firstly speak about research that she has been doing, looking at access to the internet and access to simple things such as data for women and the digital divide, and how when you look at things such as the Roach Motel, how that would negatively impact on women that are already struggling to get onto the internet itself. Over to you, Jenna.
I mean, first of all, this is really fascinating. You'd think you're reading a sci-fi book, but it's actually a reality, right? Like to the extent to which someone is actually. It's quite interesting when you think about that. This is not exactly a new quantity that at which it happens. If you're thinking about the advertising spaces, and if you're thinking about like signing up for. So when I think about it in terms of context, right, it's a matter of locating in that context of digital inequality. And in this instance, we know digital inequality is a reflection of existent inequalities that we and the difference that comes out for men and women is because when you look at access to education and income, it's mainly women who fall short of the ladder, right? It's that experience of their education. Their access to education is quite limited because of social and cultural nuances that exist in terms of, do you invest in the girl child to actually go to school and have that level of education? And then when you think about income capacity, you just have to think about the pay gap, the gender pay gap. So you have to locate that conversation of the digital gender divide and digital gender inequalities within that context. So as you were talking about these issues, I think what really stood out, sometimes people sign up for a service because it gives you that free option now, and you've probably put in whatever access the service. If it says we require your credit card, but then what happens when you can't actually sign out or delete the account? So that for me has that impact on in terms of how then the experience of being able to fully use the internet. Someone actually thinks that they've gained them so that they can access a service they want to access. And if you're thinking about it, for example, students who want to access an editorial service for some work that they have, but now they get stuck in this Roach Motel because you do not know how to delete that particular page. And that extends over to to what you had planned and budgeted because you were trying to address a financial issue of accessing a service. So you go for a free service. Now you're in that position where you can't even like exit the service. So some of us may be able, like what, if you're thinking about digital inequality from that income perspective and having located that it's mainly women and gender diverse people without access to that level of income, what you then realize is that being stuck in this Roach Motel without being able to cancel a subscribe on your services. And I think that's really described because I'm sitting here and thinking, so how many times have I signed up for a service without really thinking about it? And then when you then think about it to the extent, or to what extent can people actually have agency and control on these platforms? Because I think it's really important to locate this conversation in that, and that to what extent do you have control over what it is that you do online? There is we can say, oh, the terms of service are too long, so I don't want to read them. But then at the end of the day, it's that in that conversation, it's about like, okay, at least I know where the delete button is. But in this conversation, it seems as if it's, and I think that's a greater challenge when you think about technological tools that are developed to actually benefit from the biggest market, which is often women, right? So if you're thinking about like maybe cosmetics, if you're thinking about maybe, menstrual health applications and services, I don't know if there have been any assessment of dark patterns. It's important to assess. Some applications and some sites have been designed to entice, in particular, women, or even thinking about children as well, and what it means for them to be engaging on these platforms. I think for me, what really came out as an example when I was thinking about children and the context of shared devices that we have on the African continent, what does it mean for if everyone is going on this like to look for something across different ages, right? What other information are they being directed to? What other information is being brought up as they come onto these platforms? And I think what's most interesting, which is a conversation that I have, but the experience of children as they use these gadgets, especially if you're now going to download games with adverts in them that encourage you to get more adverts and get more adverts and get more adverts. That for me is a great of like, what is the experience of vulnerable communities when they do come online, when they actually do get connected to the internet, or they connect with very little resources, and in a context of in education, is the idea of privacy by design or taking away a manipulation of people and ending up people being locked up in debt cycles, for example, in the online space because of dark patterns. So that's what I just wanted to say from the beginning.
Thank you so much, Tanai. And from a user perspective, those are all the questions that I believe a lot of us are asking ourselves. And I will now come on to read one and to put you on the spot. Are dark patterns illegal? Because this sounds like it should be legal, or it should be against some law, or there should be a Consumer Protection Act somewhere out there that protects us consumers, especially vulnerable consumers, in particular children. And I'd say children because usually when they do get online, a lot of them are unsupervised, or parents do not necessarily look at what children are doing online. And there are quite a lot of online services that are targeted children per se that ask them to subscribe. I have seen this where it says subscribe and comment before we get onto this and this, and the kids immediately subscribe. They actually do a countdown. It's fun. You would be tempted to subscribe as well, but this is a child, so they are quite a lot easier to manipulate than an adult. And at the same time, you have other vulnerable groups, like Chennai said, targeted by these dark patterns, or that fall prey to these dark patterns and do not necessarily have the recourse to be able to get themselves out of this. For example, Roach Motel or the other types of dark patterns. So read one. Are there laws that can protect us on the continent, and also looking at beyond the continent? Is this discussion being had? Are there policies that are in draft form or that are already law?
All right. I'll take it from you. I'll take it from where you stopped, which is looking at the vulnerable population and all of that. I mean, Chennai and Uche have amplified how much of a problem this is. In the course of our research, we found really intriguing things. I mean, from and there's a way in which if you see something repeatedly, there's a good chance it could become your truth. There's this popular saying, like, you repeat a lie too many times, even though it might become true, it's still not true. But then there's this effect that's really especially when if this alternative view or whatever it is being amplified. And to put this into context, we've got situations where you have a version of that pattern you call the friend spam, and that's when you have people sort of. So this was like a model which LinkedIn started with a couple of years back. So in that very early phase where where they could actually get access into your contact list and try to like connect you or send some sort of invitation to people on your contact list to come and join. Then after that initial invitation that you're actually asking the person to join, then they go on sending subsequent emails to that person, and they make it look like the email is actually emanating from you. That's one face to it. Then you've got something like force continuity, hidden cost, price comparison prevention. Essentially, this like technically engineering manipulation into our everyday usage of the internet and the way we interface with technology. So somehow, because of lack of options, because they put this thing in your faces, in our faces, with those interesting colors, hiding the options that probably even safe for your consumer, in lighter shades. So what you see eventually is you see people ending up making decisions that are not really favorable to them, but rather to the brand. And Uche has rightly said that eventually, in the long run, in the short term, there might be little wins for you, but in the long run, you have unsatisfied consumers, which, of course, your customer center will probably be dealing with that. You probably end up dealing with litigation at some point as well. So there's the long term usage of this might probably spill into some losses for you as well. So, but to answer the question, that legal framework for it is actually quite very technical and quite slippery, because there is currently no legal framework that I know and that we found in our research that specifically address this practice. And that's because it's hard to somehow distinguish between persuading a customer to buy something and manipulating a customer to buy. It's a very thin line. It's like I don't know what parallels I can draw, but it's very, very thin line sometimes. Persuasion, it's not illegal. Manipulation, it's what's not illegal in that sense itself, but it's unethical. But ethics is something that is quite objective and is actually quite subjective. And it differs across the spectrum. So, what we've seen and the reaction we've seen across the world is in the United States, for example, where you have so many big tech giants and where this is a popular practice. So, a couple of years ago, there was a proposal in the parliament or in the legislature to have a law called the Detour Act, which literally says if you have certain number of users on your platform, which is way over 1 million, I think about 3 million users or thereabouts, maybe 1 million, I can't remember, then you should implement some things. Now, you're expected to sort of create a process where you make some transparency declaration as to what you do, how you do, and how you do those things. Then it goes on to place some safeguards that actually in favor of consumers. But if we can't bring it back home to see what are the existing legal framework for this thing. Again, one thing we need to keep in mind is if you see that pattern sometimes, and especially from a service you use so frequently, you might not know. Anyone who has tried booking an hotel before or making an hotel reservation using any of these, whether all these hotel aggregators, you notice when you're trying to book, you just want to book an hotel and you just want to get out. And often than not, they always make the interface so easy from looking for favorable from location preference to whatever it is that you want. But you see that while you're trying to book, or maybe you're trying to take your time to make a decision, you might probably get a pop-up or maybe something on the screen that's telling you about 60-something people have actually looked at this same place in the last few hours. Only 4 of these options is actually left, which means it triggers some sense of urgency in you. Sort of, hey, it looks like persuasion, but it's actually manipulation. But that's not even where it gets tricky. Where it gets tricky is when you're even bullied to make some decision. So I'll give an example. So part of our research, we do something that goes on like the chance you can acquire a dash product are really, really low. And if you're really an egomaniac, let me use that word, or your self-esteem is going to get hurt by things like that, there's a very good chance you might probably want to prove them wrong that no, the chances is not that you end up buying the product. But that's like literally bullying you into making a decision, and that's manipulation. That's not persuasion in any way. So again, because the line is so thin, that is actually so hard to make the distinction. And again, you really can't also criminalize things that is meant to like trigger psychological and behavioral pattern, or to influence psychological and behavioral pattern on human. Because of course, on one spectrum, it looks like persuasion. On another spectrum, it looks like manipulation. But when the line gets too far, or when it's stretched too far, that's where we have a couple of existing legal framework that we have in place that sort of looks into it. And from an African point of view, part of what we saw is we have like things around electronic transaction law. It's actually very clear about contracting. And when you speak to contracting, there are laws about what constitutes terms of a valid contract, how you can't, force someone or maybe compel them illegally to actually make a decision. So all of these things are what we looked at. We look at data protection point of view, because that pattern could actually create a situation where you have gross privacy violation, which means, Amanda, you gave a situation of kids who jump on games. That's some of the things we found too. You see people asking, think of every quiz you take, BuzzFeed, for example, you quiz on BuzzFeed, and sometimes you get questions in between it that are completely unrelated to the line of quiz you're taking. And honestly, they are actually not related to the quiz, but they're actually kind of extracting information from you. So you end up seeing there are some things you do that actually take more information or your personal data more than they should. And you are questioning, what happened to data minimization? Don't take more than you need. So also, if you look at it in that spectrum, there are a number of things around fairness, around transparency, around accountability from these platforms that speaks to data protection point of view. Then we have the consumer protection point of view. And from the consumer protection point of view, the common thread we found in few African countries that have a consumer protection law is that they all also criminalize the act of making a representation that eventually is untrue. So, and when you look at this sometimes too, there are some of these things that are actually untrue. Like when you look at flight aggregators, and they tell you in so minutes, if you're not careful, this thing might probably fly up, bullying you. If you look behind it, there's actually no one doing all of these things. There is no 20 people looking at anything. There is no 40 people looking at anything. It's just a brand putting out that information to actually make people make decisions that are in their favor. So we look from a consumer protection point of view, from competition laws point of view, electronic transaction laws, and of course, data protection law. So those are like the few legal framework that we have that when we stretch them or when we construct them in a very progressive sense, they could sort of offer some sort of protection to consumers as it is. But currently, there's no single framework that expressly mentions that pattern as something that is actually illicit. But there are so many inferences where we could stretch the law as it is right now to sort of protect consumers. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Ridwan. And as a brief follow-up, and I'll ask you to respond to this quite briefly, is what happens if I find that I've been manipulated? Let's say I am looking to book a hotel and the website tells me that there is only one room left. And it actually turns out there is not one room left, but I quickly panicked and booked that particular room because I just felt it's going to go, so I need to get it. So I have technically been manipulated. And we can talk about the Nigerian Consumer Protection Act or the data protection regulations in Nigeria. Is there anything that would protect me? And would I be able to go to, let's say, a regulator or a regulatory authority and report this? Or you obviously can't go to a police station because it's not a crime, but where can I go?
All right, thank you for that. I mean, I'm a big fan of saying something like, when we have these data protection laws, consumer protection laws, the laws are just there sometimes, except we use them. If we really don't test the laws, we never know the extent of issues that we have. So for me, advice, if you have been manipulated, you can actually approach the Consumer Protection Authority in your country or the Data Protection Authority and sort of make a complaint. How you weave the complaint around it, there's so many provisions under the Consumer Protection Law, for example, around representation, around manipulating people into buying things. So if you weave your complaint around that particular provision of the law, for example, I'm not saying I'm sure, but I think the regulator has a legitimate case to look at it. And of course, from the data protection point of view, there are issues around transparency and also issues around fairness. And look at the principles of data protection. So also, if they're asking you for more data than actually is necessary, you can also invoke things like data minimization as a principle. So when you weave your complaint around some of these issues, there's a very good chance that the data protection authority will be looking at it. In 2010, when LinkedIn pulled this off, it resulted in, I think, about $13 million litigation. And of course, beyond also the regulators, there's also the option to approach the courts to interpret some of these issues. But again, like I said, we can infer slight protections from the legal framework that we have. But as it is right now, the legislative proposal we'll be making is also in the future, we'd like to see a law actually expressly mention their patterns, address it in all these manifestations, and of course, look to protect consumers.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Uche, where does aggressive advertising end and manipulation begin when you as a designer are sitting behind your laptop and you are setting up this Roach Motel, for example?
So like we do say, like he explained earlier, it's a pretty fine line, right? And that's the tricky part, right? Because sometimes you have to think about the ethical repercussions, right? And ethics is something that people get to define for themselves. The LinkedIn example is one of my favorite when it comes to that person because 13 million was a crazy amount for them to pay, right? It was in 2015, I think. And what they did was they asked people to drop like their email addresses. They told people that they were going to create a stronger network. That was advertising. They were advertising to people that, okay, if you let us connect with your email, we'll give you a stronger network because it'll be a network of people that you already know. But then LinkedIn used this address to send invitation to emails to all of their contacts, right? Without those knowledge, right? They framed the copy or they framed the way that they advertised in a different way, right? And then they were fined, what, $30 million, of course. And they actually recorded about 75% increase in user signups at that period in 2015, right? But then when they were fined, given the number of people on LinkedIn at the time, right? I think the fine resulted to about $10 per member. So they were charged about $10 per member, right? And if you're charged $10 per member, imagine how many members it had to be for it to amount about. There's so many people that do this, right? Microsoft used bait and switch when they were trying to get people to upgrade to Windows 10, right? And it's an ethical situation because companies tend to justify this in the most ridiculous of ways. I was reading an article earlier today where in the US, right, there's a company that was trying to justify deceptive design, right? And then they did a test to justify this, right? And in their test, they were able to successfully convince about 99% of their users to sign away naming rights for their firstborn son and to grant access to browsing history to their mothers, right? And the way they did this was they created a fake test where they asked people to sign up for something and they provided a terms and conditions. But then 99% of people that signed up did not read the terms and conditions. And in the terms and conditions, right, there were all of the things like, oh, we get rights to name your firstborn child. We get rights to visit you once in a month. We get rights to all of these ridiculous things, right? And they were basically doing that to prove that it's not their fault. Users did not read the terms and conditions, so they signed. They were like, oh, they didn't force people to sign. The terms and conditions were right there. You could have read it, but you didn't read it, so you're on your own, right? And that was basically what that company was trying to express with that fake test, right? So people justify it in ridiculous ways, right? There's another example, right? When you think about it ethically, and you think about it from the position of a marketing manager or a sales representative whose job or whose life right now depends on the amount of conversion rates that he can get the company to within the next quarter, or whose job is depending on meeting their OKRs or their business OKRs, right? So people are feeling this pressure from the managerial position to deliver numbers and to deliver sales, to deliver user retention, right? To do whatever they have to do to get the business to where the business wants to be at. The truth of the matter is it's very short term because that then that then like pressurizes them into using different kind of languages or using dark patterns, or using different types of tricks and manipulative methods to convince users to do things that they don't want to do. For example, right, when another example would be hidden costs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hidden costs basically is a way where you're shopping online, people don't tell you about taxes or delivery costs or additional charges until you get to the very last page, right? And then by the time you press confirm, the price just changed from, I don't know, $20 to $50, and it's already too late because you're like, you've invested too much into it. You're at this point, you've already clicked on the button and you just withdraw. Another example is the sneak into basket. Now this is very interesting because people see the sneak into basket every time, and I don't know if they don't realize it or if they just choose to ignore it, right? But here, right, sites or websites sneakily add items to your basket by incorporating pre-selected checkboxes or confusing the opt-out choices, right? And it's basically a way for businesses to increase sales in a new product or to increase sales in a product that's on promotion, right? And on the business side or on the manager side, like, you're happy, you can see that your product is the plan has worked, right? You've seen more sales. GoDaddy does this a lot, where if you're trying to buy a domain, they tell you that the price of a domain is maybe $13 per year, or I don't know, $12 per year, trying to buy like a .com or something, right? And you're seeing that price in your mind. Maybe you only have $20, or maybe you only have like $50 in your account, and you just want to buy a domain because you want to start a business sometime next 2 years, right? And you see that $13, and you're going through all this process, I don't know, 2-3 steps along the line. And at the final checkpoint, maybe like 3 steps, they've added like 3 new things into your cart. They've added data security. I don't know. They've added SEO stuff. They've added like a bunch of crazy stuff. And then the total bill amounts to like $59. And you've invested so much into this, at this point, you don't even want to go back. And then you couple that with the classic model where they're pressuring you and they're bullying you and they're telling you, oh, 2 people just bought this. Oh, we're running out. Oh, this is about to sell out. 21 other people are looking at this thing. And you're right there. You're focused on trying to make a decision. You're freaking out. Okay, do I need to do this? Do I have to do this? If I don't do this, I'm not going to get another opportunity. And basically, that is when you feel trapped to make that decision, right? And as a designer, right, the problem now says, right, who's responsible for this kind of things, right? Who gets to decide when to or why not to or how to maneuver around these things, right? Who gets to decide that that person is bad and we should stop doing it? Because on the designer part, right, it just comes out to ethics, right? Ethics as a human being, right? Because on the designer part or on the marketing part, right, the person is just taking orders. He's taking orders from the top level. At the top level part, the manager or the CEO, whoever it is trying to make more sales. Money is important to him, right? And the truth of the matter then becomes that, or the natural conclusion is that, people look to the designers and they say, because we operate at the intersection of user and business wants, we have the power to keep both sides in balance, right? And then articles or people then encourage designers to push back on OKRs or to speak against these features that don't align with their values. Basically, like, we have the opportunity to speak against it, be like, okay, this thing isn't right. But then people paint designers as referees in the game of tug of war between business and users. Meanwhile, designers are just the rope, right? People are pulling us. And they're like, okay, users on the other side are pulling us and like, okay, we don't want to do this. Businesses are pulling us and saying, okay, we want to do this. So designers are just the rope. They're not really the referees, right? And they're trying to find ways most designers are trying to find ways to basically find a safe space where they're not in the blame. They're like, okay, I took the order from the businesses, or I was what to do. I shouldn't be blamed for this. But the truth is, you have the freedom to decide for yourself and speak up against these OKRs or speak up against these features that people are trying to introduce and be like, okay, no, there's a better way to do this, or there's a better way to get people to trust us. There's a better way to get people to buy in our services. Manipulation is not a great way to market our services, right? And that's how I personally differentiate my design work, right? I see it as, there's manipulation and there's persuasion, right? Manipulation is where you trap people into making a decision, right? You basically put people in a box, right? And another example of that is confirm shaming. I think we do want to touch on that a little bit, where he was like, confirm shaming is a typical example where, there's you're on a website and there's a pop-up, right? And then the pop-up is probably giving you like a free service or something. Or they're trying to sell you to subscribe, or they're trying to get you to get a promotion, right? And the yes button says, yes, I'd like to subscribe for 30% off or a free service. And the no button says, no, I won't subscribe because I like to suffer. Or no, I don't like good things in life. Or no, something that emotionally bullies you or manipulates you or shame you into saying yes. Everybody loves free things. You don't have to make me feel horrible because I don't want to buy into your service, right? So as designers, right, it's on you to say, okay, no, I don't want to trap this person. An easier way to go about it would be to guide people into making the service. And that's the difference between manipulative design and persuasive design. Manipulative design traps you. Persuasive design guides you, right? And when you're guiding someone, you're not, but I'll pause it there.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And as you were explaining it to me, it just became extremely clear that there is a very thin line between you trying to market a product and persuade someone to use your product versus you in the end manipulating them. We are running out of time, so I'm going to quickly go on to Megan's question. I think Ridwan has read it, but Megan is essentially asking is, do we need new laws, or should we try amend the laws that we already had to cater for dark patterns? If we amend the laws, we will also come across the issue of there's cross-cutting of sectors and there's cross-cutting of issues. So let's say if you amend the Consumer Protection Act in a particular country, will we then have an issue where we haven't dealt with some data protection provisions, and we also need to then amend the Data Protection Act in that particular country? How do you suggest we go about this? And I would also ask you to then also give us your concluding remarks from a policy and legal perspective.
All right. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Megan, for the question. I was trying to type my response. Yeah, my own saying that pattern should be specifically addressed is because it manifests in. Depending on what model you're looking at, if you look at the founder or the person the UX designer who actually first used that phrase, it has maybe about 14 different manifestations of what that pattern is. Then if you look at the Princeton University developed their own model, and they have about almost 10, somewhat related, but you see the overlapping. And you see the overlap in those models that they developed to identify dark patterns. So, if we want to use the existing body of law, then it means we're looking at bit on bit here and there that offers just slight protections here and there. It's similar to when you're in a country where you don't have maybe an express data protection law, but rather the protection maybe offers privacy in your constitution. There may be some bit of sector-specific laws scattered around. I think that's the same picture we find ourselves. As pretty much we have the consumer protection framework trying to sort of guard, offer safeguards to consumers around manipulation and all of that. Often or not, the way these laws are couched, they are not couched in the sense to sort of conceive what this manipulation could be in the digital space. So, and that's why the peculiarity of how the digital space works has to sort of be taken into consideration in future amendments of law. We really don't need to revamp. We don't need to have a distinct body of law. It might just be some sort of amendments in the language we use, sort of offer that flexible approach such that whether it's the judiciary that is making the interpretation, or it's the data protection authority, or it's the consumer protection body that is interpreting it, they are able to sort of take into cognizance the context of how the digital space works. And as I'm going to respond to that. So in my final departing words for me would be that we can't make designers the judge of what is right or wrong, because to do what is right or wrong, again, is a question of ethics, which is very subjective. And of course, there is a paymaster who is giving the instructions. So I think the obligation is on companies, organizations to sort of be more transparent. And when we say transparency in the full strength of transparency. Part of the research we did recently was looking at menstruation apps, and part of what we found was very vague privacy notices, for example, that really didn't disclose the extent of what's being done or the processing being done. And when we took it a step further, when we analyzed the apps, analyzed the websites and all of that, we found out that these people are actually offering those data to third parties, literally actually selling it. I mean, you are probably trying to spin it around in your head. Why would anyone want to sell anyone's menstrual cycle data? But this is what happens. So again, we need more transparency. We need fairness in the sense of fairness. We need more accountability on the part of companies. Then, of course, we need regulators to also step up to do their jobs when people make complaints. But more importantly, is for organizations to actually behave responsibly, such that they can actually avoid lawsuits or avoid fines and sanctions when staying endemic to their reputation. Because the gospel truth is, once it gets out and there is a big consumers are becoming more aware day by day, whether from data protection point of view, whether from consumer protection point of view. They are more aware about, they want to take control of what happens, their options. They are more aware about the protections the law offers them as well. So it's better you start doing business responsibly, or rather suffer that reputational debt, which in economic metrics is hard to actually put the value on. That's it for me. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Ridwan. Chennai, I know we've run out of time, but I'll just ask you to briefly give us your concluding remarks, especially from a user perspective.
Thank you so much, Amanda. It was quite interesting listening to it. And I think what the work that entails is rightly, as Ridwan has pointed out, people are aware of these issues. One, what we need to work towards is capacitating them with actually distinction of what it means to be trapped within the concept of dark. Then to raise capacity into, more like together to actually then be able to account for these processes. Because I think what's really crucial is oftentimes this issue and thinks it's happening to them alone. But when you come into these conversations, that's when you actually just realize that there can be much more a movement that can be done against data misuse, against this kind of practices that end up manipulating people and trapping them onto platforms, and then thinking about the social injustices as a result of these practices in these online spaces. So I commend you for the research that has been done and for actually having this conversation so that people can be aware that this is an issue. They're not just failing to delete your account, but there is something, a mechanism that's happening that's behind it. So yeah, those are my closing remarks.
Thank you so much for that, Chennai. Uche, your concluding remarks.
So I think on the designer part, right, that we can do as well, right? Right, and it's on two parts, right? We need to be able to step up and communicate with our businesses and communicate with our managers and convince them, or not convince might not be the right word, but then communicate effectively with them on business reasons why they shouldn't implement dark pattern. Because, as you know, the business people, they respect businesses and they see the businesses, right? So they need to be able to know that, okay, like everyone has said, right, consumers are starting to be aware of, the repercussions of dark patterns, right? Buyer's remorse can be a crazy thing, because when you have buyer's remorse, or you use the sneak into the basket method to get people to buy things they don't want to, and then when eventually the thing gets delivered and people experience buyer's remorse, they call customer care, right? And then it's the customer care, right, businesses, or it's the business that spends that much money to listen to customers' complaints and try to handle them. They then have to process returns and then have to repackage products, or then have to, because customers will return things that they don't want, right? And you can't, if you have a return policy, there's nothing you can do about that. And that's like some extra expense again. And then another level of expenses is marketing team then has to spend more money trying to do damage control for the situation that has happened, or like for bad public relations, or there's so many aspects of the business that would eventually be affected with the result of dark patterns, right? On the user experience side or on the conversion side of it, right, you're seeing the rates go up short term, but then long term, the other arms of the businesses will then start to suffer because of this, right? Customer care is taking calls every day with people shouting and yelling at them and telling them that they did not mean to buy this or they want to delete their account, let us go, and then people are trying to manage returns, trying to manage shipments, and trying to manage how to, revalue their products. Marketing team is suffering at the same time, right? And then on the design part, right? Or if you're trying to use persuasive design to guide people instead of manipulative designs, right? It comes down to three important things, right? And I would define them as integrity to do the job with best intentions or heart. Competence, because you need to be able to handle the job and the challenges that it might bring as a designer. And you need capability to be able to deliver the results, right? And at an expected time, and also be able to deliver in a way that will serve business goals, right? And I've read a lot about persuasive design. I've read a lot about it, right? It's a thin line as well, right? There's still some things that can be misconstrued as dark patterns, but it's an easier way to go about it because, for example, instead of using bait and switch to allure people, right? You can be using engagement methods to set out the things that people want to do and give people user control or give people freedom to decide for themselves, right? Instead of using hidden costs, you can be using explicit gains to define or provide people with what they tend to gain and, show them, okay, we also offer this, and this. Do you want any of this, right? Instead of sneaking it into their basket, you can just say it up front and be like, okay, these are the extra services that we offer. Do you want any of this? And then people decide that they see the value in it, they see the gain in it, and they want it, right? Instead of using, misdirection, you can try to orient people, right? Misdirection is where the attention of the user is being focused on one thing to distract its attention from another thing that's happening in the background, right? You can stop using trick questions and you can use treat questions instead, right? There's so many ways that we can rethink the role of a designer in this, right? And I think one important thing to mention is that, or what's important to realize is that as designers, our work has a massive impact, right? Our work has a massive impact on people. It can harm as much as it can help people, right? And that's what designers need to be aware of.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And I wish we had a lot more time. Hopefully, Ridwan will host us on his new channel. He will possibly share that on the social media platforms. But dark patterns are there. We experience them each and every single day. I hope that we'll be able to pick them up more and more and complain a lot more, send a few emails out there and educate people about what are dark patterns and how can they can go about getting any recourse. Thank you so much, Uche, Chennai, Ridwan. Thank you to the Africa iShare platform for giving us a platform to be able to have this discussion. And have a good night, everybody.
Thank you for watching the discussion. If you like the discussions, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, like our videos, and follow us on social media on Facebook, Africa iShare platform, on Twitter, Africa iShare. Thank you.